t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello there and welcome to Brussels, my love, Euronews' weekly talk show on the news bubbling here in Brussels and beyond. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up this week, although the summer tourist season has just started, Southern Europe is already feeling the heat. From infernal temperatures to wildfires, tourists are suffering and so is the economy. As the EU Green Deal unravels, we ask what short-term measures can be taken to address these weather patterns and what the future of EU climate policies look like with shrinking politicians from Green parties. And let's talk about cars. Not any old car, but the internal combustion engine that powers most vehicles. Brussels has agreed already to a phase out of the sale of diesel and petrol cars from 2035, but the EPP party, who came first in the European Parliament elections, want to ditch it. With the race on to electrify mobility and a tense trade situation between Brussels and Beijing on electric car subsidies, we're asking what the future of our four-wheel drive looks like. A warm welcome to our panel this weekend. Adelaide Charlier, Belgian climate activist and the founder of Youth for Climate here in Belgium. Welcome.
Merci, thank you.
Conor Allen, a corporate lobbyist here in Brussels.
Hello.
And Julian Paradis, EU policy specialist from EPICO. That's the Energy and Climate Policy and Innovation Council.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you're all very welcome. I know it was pretty busy this week here in Brussels. We had the EU summit here with the Ukrainian President Zelensky. We, of course, had all the news on the top jobs. But actually what we want to focus on is the weather and the impact the EU election outcome could have on addressing global warming.
Summertime, and the living is not easy in Greece. An early summer heatwave with temperatures above 40 degrees has brought about sporadic deaths and the closures of tourist sites. Back in Brussels, incoming MEPs are busy building coalitions, and on the bottom of their agenda, the EU Green Deal. Compared to the green euphoria of 2019, the new makeup of the European Parliament could make climate laws harder to pass. Some even want to scrap promises already made. The question now, how much will this outcome complicate EU climate politics and deter the European Council from adopting ambitious measures?
That is the question we're posing. Conor Allen, let's start with you. What are you hearing in your circles? Do you think it will survive this Green Deal, the next legislature, or do you expect rollbacks?
Well, the Green Deal is going to survive, but in what form is it going to survive? I've started to characterise it as a bit of a zombie, actually, because it's neither alive nor dead anymore. What we saw in 2019 with this huge, ambitious climate legislation is clearly no longer the case. Voters came in these 2024 elections and they absolutely destroyed the Green parties. In 2019, Green parties won 24 votes and the EU centrist bloc called this a green wave and they used it as the basis for the climate law. In 2024, the EPP and parties to the right of the EPP gained 50 plus votes.
Well, indeed. I mean, and the Green Deal, just to remind our viewers, was, of course, the playbook of the European climate law to make this continent climate neutral by 2050. What is your take here on what this outcome could mean for this legislation?
So I would say in terms of consequences for the Green Deal, this will really come down to who sits in the future college and who makes up the majority in the parliament. We've seen, as you mentioned this week, that the negotiations around the top jobs excluded Meloni, who I would say did an autogol, a bit like the Italian team, by excluding herself, by putting vetoes, for instance, on the pick for president of the European Council. And I think now the question is really who will be in the majority and how Ursula von der Leyen will secure a majority in the parliament. Because,
of course, it was her baby, wasn't it? It was the project of Ursula von der Leyen, who's set to take another 5 years on in the Berlaymont. Adelaide Charlier, just looking at you and the climate activists, where are you? You're no longer on the streets.
Yeah, we are differentiating ourselves from the way we take action. movements throughout history have acted differently, and it is just normal and obvious with the reaction also of politics that we take different types of actions, something that we can completely discuss also. What we are mostly scared of is obviously all the signals that we're hearing from the EU bubble of wanting to withdraw, going backwards, or completely deny actually the climate emergency. The Green Deal, it's not a question of whether we keep it or not, it's a question of are we realistic or not. We have to anyways face the climate emergency. So we need to keep that Green Deal, there's no question. It's the question of how we're going to continue it. Are we going to make it stronger? Are we going to make it different? And how do we include people in the decision-making process? How do we include the social aspect? And I think that's going to be very, very hard in the next 5 years. And I think that's why we need even more climate activists in the next 5 years.
Well, you mentioned Meloni, Giorgia Meloni, the head of Italy. Of course, she's affiliated with the hard right group, the European Conservatives and Reformists, who will in fact be the third group in the European Parliament with currently 83 seats, and the Greens would be the sixth. And we saw what the Czech MEP from that group, Alexander Fonder, was saying the other day, that if he would compare the Green Deal to policy making, driving a car, in fact, he said he expects the European Parliament to either use a steering wheel or braking pedal and not just the gas pedal. So there definitely will be voices there pulling back, and we're hearing that word realistic being used a lot. What do you think this word realistic will mean in practicalities, Julian?
I think what we see now as a result of the election, but also because of geopolitical trends that have changed, that now the climate transition is not at the top of the agenda anymore. We have competitiveness, we have security issues, economy issues, and I think the main crucial aspect is now whether, to what extent the climate aspects are associated to competitiveness.
And that's the message, wasn't it, Adelaide, that voters sent as well, that it wasn't no longer a priority for them. Is that what you're hearing in your groups?
Yeah, no, obviously in my groups, climate stays a priority. But I think what is important here is seeing that the climate emergency is not a crisis. So we cannot handle it for 5 years and then say, okay, what's next? It's not like COVID. It's not like any other crisis. What's amazing with the Green Deal, what's amazing with the climate emergency plans that we can put here is that for the first time we have a long-term vision. For the first time the EU is visionary and we can be a leader. And this we cannot deny. This is what we need. We're not leaders in any other subject, so we have to make sure we keep the Green Deal to stay visionaries. After, it's the question of how do we handle all the other crises that we're facing that will be accumulating in the next years, and how do we make sure that we keep that vision, 2050, while facing the short-term crisis. But we have to do both.
And for that vision, you need leadership. And we had some viewers writing into us this week actually saying the Green Deal needs really good leadership and not just bureaucracy and regulation, but actually strong leadership. But Conor, that question we're always asking ourselves here, how do we go green and stay competitive?
The way you go green and stay competitive is the exact opposite of what the Commission is actually doing. You need to have free trade and you have to have free markets. If you take, for example, we're going to discuss it later, the electric vehicles, and we just placed massive tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles coming in. So we can't sell enough electric vehicles in Europe. We need to have these products being sold at bulk. We need to have them being sold very cheaply. The European voters quite clearly said it's all about the economy. We no longer care about the climate crisis. Or we do, but it's a second priority for us. It's all about the economy. And what we're doing is disincentivising companies from coming in, selling these great net zero products like heat pumps, like electric vehicles. The way we stay competitive is to merge the two together.
I think it's important to highlight that there are many companies, many enterprises across Europe who have called in a call that was got together by the Club of Rome saying a deal is a deal. They are reminding the EU institutions that they want the EU Green Deal to continue. Why? Because it has sent signals. The EU taxonomy is starting to work. Banks are starting to invest in different sectors. This is what we need for the energy transition, for example. This is exactly what's going on. So even for the market, even for enterprises and companies, we have to keep that vision so that they know where they're going. And they started to shift. For them, the best thing to do is make sure that we are not unreliable and every 5 years...
Well, this is it, isn't it? Industry really needs clarity. The business sector, they need to know exactly what's at stake here. Of course, they hate being told, though, this is what you have to do, or this is the target day. That's not the way they like to be told how to do business.
No, absolutely. But then again, as we said, we need clarity. And if you scrap if you we opened very bad precedents by giving the option of opening back files that had been closed. And this actually by scrapping, for instance, if we scrap the internal combustion engine ban, this means scrapping. You take away all the investment that has been done since, and you destroy the whole business case. And this is not what the industry needs. And I think I really want to tell the EPP, this is actually your chance to say, we stand with the industry. We know their demands. The demands are not less regulation, go back, rolling back climate policies. It's more accessible to more affordable green energy, more financing tools, and so on.
Well, as we said earlier, the Greens have lost seats in the Parliament. They'll be the sixth group. So we wanted to hear how they're feeling about that defeat and, of course, how they feel about the fate of the Green Deal. So we checked in with their outgoing co-chair, Philippe Lambert.
Yes, there's a real danger here that the Green Deal will fade away, in fact. I don't believe that there will be, a formal act saying now we kill the Green Deal, but the best way to kill it is just to do nothing. Because the Green Deal is regulation, but the investments are unfunded. So don't fund them and they won't happen. There's significant areas, policy areas that have been left not covered by the Green Deal, starting with, guess what, agriculture. Despite what some have been saying, that the Green Deal was a cause of the revolt of the farmers. Agriculture should be a carbon sink. In Europe, it's a carbon emitter. If you don't change our agricultural model, we will fail in the emissions of the Green Deal. So again, doing nothing is the best way to kill it.
So Philippe Lambert there making a number of points. The logical one there about the funding as well. Many people don't know how this will be funded. We know the Commission has put that figure of €1 trillion out on the table for the next decade, but that seems a little bit abstract for people.
Yes, but at the same time, we need to find funding and we need to make sure that it's on the table. And that's why there are many new mechanisms put in place that have to be directly put back into the Green Deal. This is something that we have seen, for example, even in the reaction of the COVID crisis. We wanted to make sure that in the fundings that we put on the table for each country, a percentage would go to our long-term vision, the green transition. We have to keep doing that. The crisis that we'll be facing, we have to make sure that the funds we put on the table are always coherent. What businesses and citizens need is coherent. So now every time we put funds on the table, we have to make sure they're coherent with our objective of 2050. And then there are mechanisms such as CBAM, where we may have to make sure that that money goes directly into our transition, green transition. So there are many ways we can find money, many ideas out there. So I don't think the real problem is making sure we agree on where we get the money.
And just into your circles again, does this make sense what Adelaide is saying there?
Well, it makes sense to a degree, but Europe's had its chance to put the funding on the table. We had the Net Zero Industry Act, which was touted as the great answer to the US Inflation Reduction Act. And what funding's there? It's a non-funding mechanism. They didn't put any money on the table. And, for all the well in the world, we can say the member states have to pay, we can do CBAM. All those costs get passed on to the consumer, and the consumer doesn't want costs at this moment in time. There's a cost of living crisis, there's an energy crisis. People don't want to pay for the green transition. And
that's the message that we saw as well, I guess, in those European elections. But let's talk about the farmers as well, because, of course, they were pretty noisy this year. They were out and about on the streets of the whole continent, in fact, and they were listened to. And it was interesting what Philippe Lambert said. In fact, they shouldn't be carbon emitters. They should be a carbon sink and not a carbon emitter. And I don't know if anyone saw this week in Denmark, they've introduced a levy on farm emissions in order to help them reach their climate target. I mean, could other countries follow suit here?
Yeah, we need to support farmers financially. This is the first thing that they need is financial support, right? What I see personally on a European level is that we have both the CAP, so the Common Agriculture Policy, going one direction, telling our farmers, produce faster, no matter how you do it, just do it. And on the other side, we have the Farm to Fork policy that's part of the European Green Deal, which is a total other vision of how we have to do agriculture.
Which has been watered down a lot now.
Yeah, and we're setting two objectives, right? Right now, we're not coherent at all. So we're telling them two things differently. And the subsidies are on this side, right? Produce. So it's obvious that the money is not where we want to have a respectful agriculture. So as EU policymakers, not me, but we need them to make sure that they are coherent in that vision of where we want agriculture to go in the next years.
But Julian, you said all really lies on the future incoming Commission and the decisions they take, and of course the Parliament.
Absolutely, but I think to come back to the financing question, the number one goal is first to unlock private investment. We have a few set of tools that we can use to unlock this investment. And then on the second side, as Ade just said, we actually have a lot of instruments, but also money. For instance, there's still 500 billion from the recovery and resilience funds that have not been used. We're going to have money coming from the ETS. Green public procurement, for instance. Public procurement is over 14% of EU GDP. The CAP money is still the main fund of the EU budget. So I think orientating all of this, doing climate mainstreaming, and that we have policies that all make sense and go towards the same direction is really key here.
Policies that make sense. That would be great.
Can I just jump in? Because a third of the EU's budget goes to farmers and it goes to agricultures. How much more funding do you need?
No, we have to be careful in where it goes. I don't think it goes to farmers, it goes to landowners, right? So that's the main difference. Landowners are not necessarily farmers. So this is where we go into the details of the CAP if we have time to actually debate it. So that's why we need to reform the CAP to make sure that the money goes directly to the farmer, the one actually touching the land and not to the landowners.
And we've had previous extensive debates on CAP, and we will come back to it as this new legislature comes into place. But also we were concerned as well here at Euronews about the weather patterns we're seeing now in southern Europe. Pretty dramatic. I'm sure you've all seen the headlines. And we wanted to find out whether, in the opinion of one Greek climate scientist, that was linked, in fact, to global warming. So here's the view from Dr. Kostas Lagouvardos.
The heat waves that we experienced in the last years in Greece, not only Greece, but in the Mediterranean, are a result of global warming. Because we have made an analysis, especially for Greece, for the last 50 years, and we realized that heat waves are becoming more often, they are longest, and also they are strongest. It's very bad for health because we are not acclimatized yet, and the problem is much more aggravated in the cities. Everything is related to climate change, and that means that we have to take measures to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases. We have to do it very fast because finally climate change is growing faster than we expected.
So the climate scientist Kostas Lagouvardos there saying that everything is linked to climate change and expressing as well the difficulties for cities like Athens who have very few green spaces. Does that not scare you?
It's scary, but we have the solution right there in front of us. And what we see in Europe is there are very few climate mitigation measures taken. If you think of heat pumps and air conditioning, we're in Brussels right now. I think something like 3% of all Brussels homes have air conditioning or a heat pump. So we have the measures there, we have the things there to tackle this, or to at least alleviate the worst effects of it. And we can look at the longer term sort of plan on how to deal with climate change in tandem with that.
Okay, and what about you, Adelaide? Do you think that cities are being really left alone to deal with these issues?
I think to go back on the solutions of what the cities have to put in place, and I mean, this is with the help, of course, of the EU and with the vision, is that the first solution is isolation of houses and of buildings. It would not need to, that's for me it's the best technology. It's like investing also in green areas. And for that, we need a whole new way. We need urban visionaries. We have that. But we have to be willing to change. And that's the thing. Also in cities, we have to rethink. It means that it's going to be different.
But
it's going to be different.
It's going to be hard. Often left in a bit of a traffic jam, right, behind the governments, trying to get funding from Brussels. We've spoken to a lot of mayors here on Brussels, my love, and it's not as simple as it sounds.
Absolutely, that's the issue, and the figures currently are around 300 billion euros a year in the EU of funding gap, and really need to activate this. Actually, EPICO just realized a paper on how to accelerate industry climate competitiveness in the EU, and with a series of actionable toolbox with measures that could actually unlock all these private funds.
Give me your top three.
So, for instance, one is green credit guarantees for climate investment, therefore enabling to de-risk the investment, which is really the number one priority. We have actually a lot of money in pension funds, in insurance companies, in banks and so on, and this really needs to be unlocked. Secondly, green lead markets. We need to create demand for low-carbon products. This goes through definitions of what is a low-carbon product, but also, for instance, as I said, public procurement that could really be easily used for that. And third, I would say renewable energy. We really need more streamlining for permitting.
That makes sense to you?
Yeah, of course, it makes a lot of sense. And obviously, we have to also make sure we listen to science as a basic of also activists. And I think in the energy transition, the hardest part is also the transmitters. We invest massively into renewable energy, obviously. And then renewable energy, the hard part is making sure that constantly it can go reach people without stocking, which is one of the main problems. So we have to be careful also in talking about how much we produce, but how much we consume also. That's a big debate in the energy transition, but we really have to have it.
And final thoughts from Conor on those points?
Well, I think you've both taken quite a state-centric approach. I think what we need to do is unleash the power of the free market. This is a global crisis. It requires global resources and it requires global companies to step in there. We're not going to fight the climate crisis without mobilising the free market to fight the climate change.
On that clear
And
conclusion,
giving them
we can
a clear
bring
instruction through the states.
And on that point, we can bring this conversation to an end. But do stay with us here on Euronews, because after the break, we'll be zooming in on the future of the car. See you soon. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. I'm Maeve McMahon, and along with Adelaide Charlier, Conor Allen and Julien Paradis, we're talking through the news of the week. And one big story our newsroom is watching is the deteriorating relations between Brussels and Beijing. At the heart of the latest dispute, electric cars. Brussels has said it will impose tariffs on EV imports by the 4th of July if differences cannot be ironed out before. FYI, last year alone, almost 500,000 battery electric cars were imported into the EU, worth almost 10 billion. So, Conor, I imagine you're following this story. It looks like electric cars are the latest kind of flashpoint, no, in a broader spat about what the Commission says is unfair state support for green tech exports.
Well, it's protectionism. It's naked protectionism. I think the real issue with the subsidies on Chinese electric vehicles, it's neither a climate issue. If it's a climate measure, the tariffs would be 0% and would let in these clean, green electric vehicles. If it is an economic issue, they'd be at 100%, like the Americans have done. What the Commission's really, really scared of are these huge, giant European companies like BMW, Volkswagen, and so on, losing their competitive advantage. But in fact, we have to say, if they can't keep up with the times, they deserve to fall behind. Let them fail.
Hello, I wish we had them around the table with us to get a reaction from that. Julian, what should our viewers be taking away from this conversation?
First of all, I really welcome that the EU is finally waking up to China and the US having abandoned multilateralism for good and takes active measures against over-subsidization, because technically this is not free competition and free trade, which I agree has benefits as well. It incentivizes competition, it makes the transition cheaper and so on. But this is not the case with over-subsidized Chinese cars. And we also need, obviously, charging infrastructure. But I think these mistakes can really cost us and have a consequence of the European market being flooded by cheap Chinese cars.
So as you can see, this is a pretty big story. Everyone has a say. We'll keep an eye on it. The 4th of July, as I said, is the key date. Talks are very much ongoing. The phone lines are open between Brussels and Beijing. And the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, ASIA, is also keeping a very close eye on that story. And also on the whole evolution, if you like, of electric mobility in the European Union. So we actually caught up with their director, Sigrid de Vries, to ask us where we were on that journey towards electrifying mobility. Take a listen.
By now, about 1 in 5 vehicles have a plug, newly sold vehicles, so that's great in itself. About 12% of those are battery electric, the others are plug-in electric. But it's not enough, and electrification is a team sport, so we need many other conditions to be in place. We need the charging infrastructure, we need the market to come round, mentality shift, mindset shift, and we need incentives also to help kickstart the market. And all of that together will help accelerate towards global decarbonization, but at the moment we're not yet there where we need to be.
Sigrid de Vries there, the director of ASIA, speaking to me there and posing the question, how do we get there? Adelaide, we're still very far away.
I'm not going to bring you the solution, but it's really good that we're having this debate about the electric cars. And if I can bring back something that we too often forget in here is a worry that many people have, and many experts and scientists also saying we cannot go from a fossil fuel-based society to a raw material-based society, where it's also a place where it's hard to get such raw materials without not respecting human rights. For the moment, it's almost impossible. individual, without having also geopolitical ties and therefore maybe tensions coming in. I mean, raw materials is not something we find necessarily in Europe. So our autonomy is questioned going towards that direction. And also just in general, for example, in Belgium, engineers have analyzed our land and have said, in Belgium, not everyone can ride an electric car. It just would not be possible because we do not have enough production of electricity for the moment, and we would not reach such amount of cars. So I think it's important to highlight also that the future is not only all of us having an electric car, is making sure that the mobility will be anyways public transport, making sure that all mobility will be electric, of course, but we will need in that mind shift that we are having to construct, like it was said earlier, it will need to be also not individual. The future is not individual, it's collective, and especially in the mobility.
Oof, but how do you tell that to people living across rural Europe who have 2 or 3 cars outside their house?
Of course, but the people moving into the city, because this is where we are seeing people going also, so we have to, I'm not talking to people who do not have public transport right now in front of their house. I'm talking about everyone in the city, and of course people right now in rural areas. We have to make sure that they have the solutions, and maybe for them it will be the electric cars, but it will not be the solutions for the people living inside the city.
For the city. Well, indeed, like one of the main complaints, in fact, of people is the lack of infrastructure. And according to Commission data, the number of accessible recharging points in the EU has doubled between 21 and 2023, but it's still only around 630,000, I think, Connor. So we're still a long way to go.
Absolutely, really, really far to go. And the government has to keep up the investments in that. But going back to what you said, Adelaide, who decides on this great communitarian future that you've proposed? People want individual liberties and people want individual freedom. And for many people, personal mobility is the freedom. And, you know, for people like us, I think we're all in a very kind of good situation where we can choose to use the train or we can choose to use the car. But there's many people who don't have that choice.
We have to make sure that this is a choice, exactly. It's great that you pointed out. We need to make sure people can have access to public transport today. It's not
and when given the choice, what will they choose? They will
exactly,
choose
depending on the price.
mobility.
Today we're subsidizing massively, actually mostly still individual options. We're not subsidizing enough the collective ones. So if we would align that, I'm sure that people will go to the cheapest option, which is kind of all of the time. So right now, if we would make trains cheaper, people would go for trains, not for planes. That's just how people function. You know it yourself. It's money, right? And if we want to make it equal and fair and ecological...
Let's bring in Julian. Let's bring in Julian. Because, I mean, many would argue as well. Many would agree with you. I'm sure a lot of viewers are screaming that at the TV. But at the same time, the Green Party would be screaming, we have rights and obligations and we need to live within our planet, our boundaries.
And I would agree with Adelaide by saying that basically the mobility is also a political choice. How our current transport infrastructure looks like is a political choice. But the EU also needs to figure out what kind of industrial base it wants. If it opts for green electric vehicles, then it means we need to start, for instance, mining in Europe. We need to, as I said, have more affordable electric vehicles, but also massively invest in the rail system.
Today, who takes public transport? Who is able to do that? And who has 5 cars? Who has 1? I mean, the question of individual cars is not the fact that we're taking away 1 car from a big family. We're taking away the idea that you have 5 cars for 3 people. You know, the mindset of telling ourselves that we can consume. This is the problem, right? So obviously, the social question is super important in the mobility aspect.
A huge challenge it will be for the incoming Commission as they try and tackle all those challenges that they are faced with. But that brings this conversation to an end. Thank you so much to our panellists for being with us, and thank you for watching. See you soon on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. I'm Maeve McMahon, and along with my guests, we're just taking a look back at the stories of the week. And one that made us turn was this. Activists from Just Stop Oil spraying Stonehenge, the prehistoric megalithic structure in southern England that attracts tourists from all across the globe. A day later, the same group tried to target the jet of the pop star Taylor Swift in Stansted Airport to call her out for her carbon footprint. Turned out seemingly to be the wrong jet, but regardless of the facts, the images have pretty much gone viral in the past few weeks. So I want to ask my panel, do they think they're heroes or vandals there? Connor, let's start with you.
Neither heroes nor vandals, but criminals. outright vandalism they wreaked upon Stonehenge, it actually affected me quite emotionally. These people, they do not have any consensus in society. They haven't built up any political consensus for their arguments. And when faced with their own weaknesses and their own ability to create arguments, they sidestep our democracy and instead quite arrogantly try to tell us what to do. And the worst thing about it is it's completely subjective. If this is a group of conservatives or libertarians or neo-Nazis doing exactly the same thing, they'll be the first to condemn it.
You look horrified by what you're hearing now, Adelaide.
It's what's the role of activists, right? It's not to bring consensus. This is not their goal. The reason why I'm an activist today and the reason why young people are around the table and debates today is because we have skipped school. And the day I skipped school, I swear the entire world was really mad at students for doing so. It was unacceptable. And today, of course, we have to question the role of the way we do it. But they have tried everything. They are bringing back, the main goal is bringing back the subject on the table, which is happening right now.
But don't
right?
you think this hurts us in the long run, in terms of gathering support for the policy?
Because the goal is not gathering support here with those actions. Gathering support would be the moment where we bring people in the streets.
Well, let's hear from the horse's mouth, because we actually spoke to Adrian Johnson. He's the spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. Take a listen.
Andy Weir, in his 2011 novel The Martian, opens with these famous lines: "I'm practically fucked. That's my considered opinion. Fucked." Now, his character says that because he's stuck on Mars. There's no soil. There's limited food. He knows he's going to starve to death. We are heading the same way. I have 2 grandchildren, and by 2050, they will be 30 years old. I don't want them to be fighting wars over water and food. Our plan is to escalate, to intensify. Our government can basically call off all of our actions with the stroke of a pen by committing to sign an international, legally binding treaty to end all extraction and burning all fossil fuels by 2030.
So Adrian Johnson there, not mincing his words, from Just Stop Oil, saying he's doing this for his grandkids.
No, and I completely agree, I have to say, where this is coming from when people lock themselves to the road or spray jets. And also, Fridays for Future was central in gathering support for the Green Deal. But I would say now we need to convince instead of antagonize. We saw the results of the Greens at the last election, that when you don't have citizens on board, you actually cannot implement policies.
Do you know the window of Overton? This is a theory of change. We all have different theories of change around the table. This one is saying we have to take leadership. They are the ones who will bring this subject where we're like, guys, this is too much. This is too much. But tomorrow, if we can be 10,000 in the streets of Brussels, in front of the Commission, demanding exactly the same thing, people will say, okay, that I support, but I don't support this. And they are moving the window of Overton so that we can make sure that at some point it's acceptable to hear that whatever is happening, how we take actions with activism, what we need is actually climate action.
Well, the only difference is that you support that, though. If this was a group of neo-Nazis painting the Eiffel Tower white, it was not as they're different. They think they're right and you think they're right. The moment you step outside the bounds of society and the moment you step outside the mechanisms for democratic change that we have built up over hundreds of years of struggle, you lose all eligibility.
Well, that brings this conversation to an end. As we heard there from Just Stop Oil, they're not going anywhere, so get used to them. And we'll be reporting it all here on Brussels, My Love. Thank you so much to Adelaide Charlier, Conor Allen and Julianne Pardee for being our guests this weekend. And thank you so much for watching. Reach out, brusselsmylove@euronews.com is our email address. Take care and see you soon.